And he thought it was just an natural accumulation of shells. Well, the seagulls are always playing with them, so he learned very quickly that it was something of substance you don't want to mess with. I mean, you don't want to preserve. The good news was that he was a great guy. He really felt badly about it. We got mitigation dollars so that we could go in and test it. So we got data recovered from it. Damage had already been done. The marker is still there. It was when we were replacing a lot of our coastal bridges, and they needed to have accurate GPS markers. So he learned his lesson, especially because he had to go in front of, he had to give a presentation at the regional surveyors conference. So it really hit home, and he was able to pass that word along that you don't mess with archaeological sites, or before you dig a hole and pour concrete in it, you talk to somebody who might have a different opinion. I love the butterfly nets that these folks are using. Of course, that's right by Smeltchan. This is Smeltchan Beach. And it is one of the few places today where smelt actually come on the central Oregon coast, where smelt actually come right on shore. And that must have been a very important processing area for folks that were living in this area. Looking a little bit further south, an archaeological site that's been recorded in the state park. Just right in this area here, just with the screen. Another one right along the edge on the south shore of the Yachats River that continues quite along there, quite a ways along there, with a couple breaks. And then another site as you get a little ways further south. It's one of my favorite photographs, and I realized that Betty Bond's grandfather took it.
Grandfather's brother.
Betty Bond's grandfather's brother took this photograph of a man in a boat with a dead bear at the front of it. I love this photograph, and it was taken when, 1900 or so? It's probably taken from just about where the bridge is. Mm. But look at the shells. Mm-hmm. Look at the shells. Granted, the photograph at this point, this particular copy is, despite Photoshop and Greg's fabulous efforts at editing my pictures, it still shows that there's things that are showing up there even though it's light. Yeah.
Have you ever had a chance to evaluate what was happening here in terms of civilization, say 10,000 years ago, and what was happening anywhere else? Like 10,000 years, we're almost back before the formation of any urban settlements, I think. So, I mean, would it be true to say that people here 10,000 years ago, the tribes would have been very much on an evolutionary level with other parts of the world?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think people lived in different areas and adapted to the environments that they were in. Here, they didn't have to congregate because they had food resources that were so abundant, but not without limits. And so maybe you didn't want a group of people here of, you didn't want a village of 500 or 1,000 people here because it couldn't sustain that group of people. So when you study Northwest Coast Indian culture, when you have an opportunity to spend time and talk with elders, you realize the richness of their culture in terms of religion, spiritualism, language, mythology, art, and here on the Northwest Coast, where it's often been thought because there was, you were not so tightly tied to the land of eking everything out that you could, there was more time for the arts to flourish. I have no idea. We don't have a whole lot of record except what's in elders' recollection for this particular area because disease had wiped out so many people, European-initiated disease and major epidemic of smallpox in 1780, malaria in 1830s, and many other things too. So we don't have a record here of that. You go to a site that is remarkable up on the Olympic Peninsula, and probably some of you have been to the Ozette site, yeah, and to the museum at Nia Bay, yeah, and that was a site that I'm willing to bet that as a result of the 1700 earthquake, part of this hillside gave way, because remember it's January, supersaturated soils came down over several of the houses there, and in an instant froze time. And as those houses were excavated by water, by crews from the University of Washington and Washington State University over a long period of time, with the materials, all the things that came out of there staying in the community of Neah Bay, with a beautiful museum where they were beautifully curated. You get to see the richness of things because you get to see the full picture. And that kind of art development and regard for, you know, what we consider utilitarian items that are embellished with carved figures, and just the remarkable materials that came out of that site indicated to me that this was a rich, rich, rich culture. It continues to be. It's a debate what was happening 10,000 years and how long does it take cultures to evolve into areas. Here they didn't do that because they didn't have, in my opinion, and please correct me if you have a different one, is here they didn't have to have that structure that often led to large cities. They didn't have to manage people the way you do if you're an agrarian society, where you have a certain schedule of when you have to plant, water, who's going to harvest, who's going to market it, all the way down the line. It's an interesting question. We can continue that at some point too. Just a quick aerial photograph of the burgeoning shamrock lodgettes, and in front of it the Sherwood Inn. Just a quick picture if you hadn't seen the Sherwood Inn. This came, from what my understanding, this was disassembled down in the Umpqua, was it the north fork of the Umpqua? Somewhere in that area, and hauled up piece by piece and reassembled here, and then eventually burned. Beautiful inn. I just stuck that in just at this point. Interesting. You know, I get into historic photographs, which I have real passion for because they tell you so much information. Well, soon to be the coho. Now that I should mention that in ethnographic notes of John P. Harrington, who worked with tribal folks with the Coos, Umpqua and Siuslaw, and also with the Siletz in the early 1940s, they talked about that area being a shinny ground. Now there's an archaeological site that fringes that, but they were playing that was a level area during the reservation period where they played a game of shinny, which is something like, it was wood sticks, something like hockey. Field hockey. Okay, going a little bit further south, some early pictures, 1910 picture, 1930 picture of the area. Well, why don't you just go ahead and show it what it looks like today. You see the fence lines? Yeah. Archaeological sites through this area. There's a couple undocumented sites. There's sites up the draws, just very small scatters, and nothing of real depth, but probably kind of a one-time use. You can see in the foreground here that same shot looking back to the south, and you can see the prominent house pit. Can you see those? What is that? They're house pits. It's where folks have come with maybe some of their planks, or at least with some of, and camped out or stayed at this particular period for a long time. In 1951, Luther Cressman, who was really the father of archaeology for the state of Oregon, he was a professor at the University of Oregon, earlier married to Margaret Mead, but he had one of his students visit the communities along the Oregon coast in 1951, 1952. They talked with people who were in the community that knew of people who had artifacts or had sites on their property. And then he went out, he documented them in kind of a crude, but he documented them, and he documented these house pits. He documented something like 117 house pit sites in Lincoln County, and I think there's probably a dozen left today. Yeah.
Phyllis, just when you say house pits, I'm thinking about the Sumig village down in Patrick's Point State Park. where the Yurok tribe has reconstructed a village
Right.
there. And some of those houses are like the plank house you showed earlier, they're above ground, and some
Right.
of them, the roof is right on the ground, and it's a sunken habitation.
Yeah.
Is that what that is there?
Well, this is probably one that was dug out in more of a rounded configuration, probably for a short time seasonal use. You wouldn't want to be out here in the middle of our storms where we get 100-mile-an-hour winds. But they would often dig out an area so they could put planks upright in it and stabilize them. And it also meant that the wind was not blowing through there. You know, you could put mats or hides on it and keep the wind from blowing through. They could, on their canoes, and these were canoe people. These folks had canoes of various sizes: ocean-going canoes, lake canoes, one-woman canoe for small lakes or estuaries, wide variety. Well, try to get through the brush of this area. You know, you're crazy. You can't do it unless you're down on your hands and knees or following an elk trail. But these folks could come into these areas by watercraft, and they could bring a lot of things with them. They could bring their mats, and they could bring their hides and their planks and whatnot, and set a nice, wow, I wouldn't mind having my house in that location. Not on the house pits, of course, I'd be to the side. But what a wonderful place to camp out, you know, seasonal use. Yeah.
Yeah, Phyllis, you think trying to use LiDAR to maybe help identify some of these spots?
Yeah, LiDAR is a remarkable tool that's just coming available to us on the coast here in the last couple of years. It can actually penetrate tree cover, canopy cover, so you can actually get right down to the ground. So it would give you an image very much like that if it was treed. It's a wonderful technique. Talk to Paul more about it, because I'm sure he's very knowledgeable about LiDAR, but it's a great new tool for use here on the Siuslaw National Forest in Western Oregon. Well, here's my friends Joanne and Sally. You all know them, and they're standing on the extent of those house pits. Fortunately, this piece of land has not been developed yet. Guess I was just going to point out here where the Middens, where one of the sites that's on the National Register is located in the state park here. There's undoubtedly more. You know, I can, as I go down the road, I can see shell deposits there by, was it Gender Drive, Windy Way area, of course, up the draws for more shelter. There's several up the draws at Cape Perpetua that haven't been investigated yet. So there's more shell middens throughout this area. There's also a very intriguing, to my eye, and Joanne and I have talked about it, a depression that fits about the size of the plank houses around here. It's right on the northwest corner of Marine Drive. And it's right along, would have been on the south side of Agency Creek coming down to the southwest. So I don't know who owns that, but if you do, before you dig, please let us take a look at it. Even better, donate it to the city. And I guess that really brings me to the end. Things have disappeared. In my lifetime, I grew up on the Oregon coast, up by Glen Eden Beach. Oh boy, in my lifetime, I've seen things disappear. Things have changed, and so what I see today is not what I remember them being as a little girl. And it's just going to continue to change.